And we're live here on WCEG Network on the People's Choice. And I'm your host, Joe Flint, all one word, like a tribe called Quest. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with a vengeance, back like we never left before in our new fall of 2022 season. Thank you all so much for your continued support and love of WCEG Network. Listen, today I wanted to take this opportunity in this show on the People's Choice to discuss the monarchy and to discuss Her Royal Highness, the Queen of England, that of the recently deceased Queen Elizabeth II. I know a lot of people are, back and forth in their concerns of whether or not, she had any real purpose in our lives and society and so on and so forth. And so I thought it not robbery to make a show or to host a show in reference to her reign and the life that she lived as Queen Elizabeth II. But I also wanted to address the issue of colonization because upon her death, amazingly, it seemed that everybody who did not pass American history all of a sudden seemed to know everything about colonization and the fact that the queen is not responsible for colonization, but that of the British monarchy, which was part of colonizing many countries throughout this world. Ladies and gentlemen, so it is my pleasure tonight to present to you life and times and facts about that of the dearly departed, Her Royal Highness, the Queen of England, Elizabeth II. Today, at about, I think it was about 6 a.m. Our time, I tuned in to watch the funeral, the final funeral for Queen Elizabeth II. Now, there have been jokes and things that have been going on all the week since she has since passed concerning her death. And the one thing that I noticed is that there were a lot of individuals talking about what she did or didn't do in reference to colonization. And I wanted to kind of first talk about what colonization is and where it came from. Well, I say first, but I wanted to address this issue as I saw it all across the internet. So many people, rather than just simply saying, the queen is dead or, that, Europe lost its queen or however, immediately there were posts concerning colonization and that some people were saying it's about time that she had died and so on and so forth. And here's the thing, the queen, the king, the monarchy is generally a sympathetic or not sympathetic, is generally what's the word I want to use? It is it does not have the political power that our president or leaders or dignitaries of other countries has. The monarchy is simply a position that is more ceremonial. That's the word I'm looking for. It is a more ceremonial role than it is that of a ruling role. However, in years past, the king or queen of England had responsibility for all of those things, but that has since passed because they now have what's called a parliament. So I wanted to just share, Queen Elizabeth came to power, if you will, in 1952 after the death of her father, who had served, I think, around 16 years at that time. And of course, he had become reign because his brother before him had abdicated the throne. And because of that, Queen Elizabeth's father, who was affectionately known as Bertie, was now placed into the role of King of England. Now, their family had no intention of serving in that realm because, in truth, the brother before him was set to be king for the remainder of his life. And so Bertie and his wife, his wife, along with his two daughters, were expected to just be that of royals in the family. However, upon the abdication of the throne, because he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, who was a two-time divorcee American woman, as they would say, he abdicated the throne, and now that placed Bertie, who was Queen Elizabeth's father, into the position as Edward VI. Ladies and gentlemen, this came about, and his death untimely death at the age of, I believe, 56, caused her to end up serving as queen at the age of 25 years of age. So she didn't get a chance, if you will, as a young woman to enjoy her time as a wife, as a mother, because she was immediately thrust into this role as Queen of England. Now, some argue that that she was in charge of this, that, and the other, and that she was responsible for so many different things along that role. But again, as I said earlier, this is a mostly ceremonial role. And if, in fact, the parliament there would like to get rid of such a thing, they could vote it down. However, they have not done so, and clearly have not done it in the past 70 years that she has served as the monarchy. And now moving on to King Charles III, who is her son. As you may or may not know, in order for a new king or queen to be placed in that role, the previous one has to die. Or in Queen Elizabeth's father's place, one has to abdicate the throne. There was a lot of talk about individuals where Prince Harry falls in line. And here's just a little bit of education here along the lines of that. So in order of the next in line to the throne, we now have King Charles III, who was previously Prince Charles of Wales. Next in line would be Prince William, who is now the Prince of Wales. After that, that would be Prince William's son would step into play. Now, if for some strange reason he had not had children and had abdicated the throne as his great uncle had done in years past, then that meant that Harry would become king. However, it is passed down through the generation and not necessarily next of kin, but through the generation. So that would mean that my oldest daughter, if I had been king, would be next in line to become queen of said land. So that's just a little understanding of how that goes. But brothers and sisters, I want to, give some education on colonization or colonism and where it came from. There's this misbelief that colonism came or started with the queen, or some people believe that she is the reason that it is continued. And I need it to be known that she is not said reason for its continuation, but she is, or if she wanted to, she could have spoke, and said something along the lines of wanting to get rid of it. But in truth, the parliament has the full reign on that. Colonization was practiced by empires such as Greece and ancient Rome, civilizations, and they all extended their borders into surrounding and non-contiguous, or as we call it, the continental United States. So all of the states that are in there, none of the contiguous areas from about the 1550 BC. So this started long before Queen Elizabeth came about. And it carried on for centuries and centuries to follow. And it drew on the physical and population resources of the people that they conquered in the order to increase their power. So just like any other place, when a country wanted to have rule over another area or to have more power, more land, or more things of that nature, they invaded other areas and they took over, kind of like what we see that has been happening with Russia and Ukraine. Russia wanted to take over Ukraine and wanted it to be a part of its country and have full say into what Ukraine does. But what Russia was not expecting was that Ukraine was going to fight back, and that's what has been happening. And unfortunately, this war is still going on. Modern colonization, brothers and sisters, began during what's also known as the Age of Discovery, being in the 15th century. So Portugal began looking for new trade routes and searching for civilizations outside of Europe. And in 1415, Portuguese explorers conquered other areas and coastal towns in North Africa, kicking off an empire that would last up until 1999. So can you imagine that from the 15th century up until just the 20th century, colonization had taken place? And so a lot of people talk about the United States and how the United States was originally part of Britain's colony. colonization, as was and still is that of Canada. However, the United States saw fit to get its independence in 1776. And so, brothers and sisters, we now find that America is its own entity, but at some point it had belonged to the British rule. And so when we examine this, we have to realize that a lot of the countries that wanted freedom either had to fight for freedom or simply had to request for it to happen in their area. And whether people know this or not, or acknowledge this or not, under Queen Elizabeth's 70-year rule, somewhere of 60 countries gained their independence under her term. So what does that mean? That means that at some point, she, as the head of state, had to oversee the, if you will, de-annexation of these countries being a part of the Europe rule. Whereas some people believe that she was responsible for them, she is more responsible for them taking their own seat and becoming their own entities of in and of themselves. So what does the head of state really do? What is the monarchy, and how do they really play a part in Europe and in their system? Let me add this, that again, as I've said previously, that if in fact Europe, England, London, England, in any of the areas, Northern Ireland and the Netherlands and Canada and all of these places, if they wanted to get rid of this monarchy, they could do so. Nobody is making them hold on to it. They like it because it exudes a power. That's the same that when the United States was formed. For those that don't know, there was question of what to call the leader of the United States. And they did not want to call him king. And so someone came up with the term president. But in some instance, when the presidency of the United States was first founded, there was no term limit on presidents. And so, in fact, a president up until Franklin Delano Roosevelt could have served for as long as he possibly could, as long as he was elected. There's the difference in lies in the monarchy. The monarchy does not run for office, nor is he or she elected to office. So the head of state in the parliament is a neutral person with respect to political matters. The head of state does not serve as a Democrat or Republican, whereas here in the United States, our president, be it a male or female, is a declared party. Whereas in England, in London, England, where the king currently resides, there is no political party for him, and there was no political party for the Queen of England, again, as they are a ceremonial role and they do not have word or give spoken word, if you will, in respect to the political matters. There is the parliament. Now, they do not vote, as I said, nor do they stand for election. Their role is more ceremonial and formal roles in relation to the government. Their government likes the thought process of having a king and a queen. If you notice, when you look at the political leaders around the world and the people who go out into these G8 or whatever the summit is, when they go into climate meetings and you have the UN and so on and so forth, the person that is there is the prime minister, for he or she is the elected official over the parliament. The same would be for our president. Notice it's the prime minister that meets with the president of the United States to discuss foreign policy and so on and so forth. It is not the queen, of course, Queen Elizabeth at that time, who had seen 7 or 8 presidents from the United States in her 70-year reign. And so, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who have continued to make these statements that, oh, she was in charge of this and she was in charge of that, she was only the head of state and not in response or responsible for any of the laws that took place in the land. Now, could she speak and say something and they listened? She could speak. Would they listen? That was completely up to the parliament. The Crown Parliament is used to describe the British legislature, whereas ours is called Congress, theirs is called the Prime or the Crown Parliament, which is made up of the sovereign, the House of Lords, and the House of Commons. The House of Lords would be the United States Senate, and the House of Commons would be that of the United States representative. So I want you all to notice, if anyone ever paid attention, or if you listen and watch the any of the funeral today, you will notice that every time they played the national anthem, it sounds very familiar. You know why? Because America, when it was founded, loved the sound of the music that was played by the national anthem of England. And so we just rewrote the words. But if you listen closely, you'll know that it has the exact same background as our song. So it's very funny to me to hear that, or when you think about. So I wanted to share with you the constitutional role of Parliament and of the Queen. Her job, or his job now as king, is very different from what most people may think. Again, it's a ceremonial role. They go around and they are the face of the country. They make the country look good. They make the country sound nice. There were, if I remember correctly in my research, about 14, 15, or maybe even 16 African countries under Queen Elizabeth's reign, not rule, but reign, that received their independence during her time. Now, if she was one of those, what's the word I would like to use? If she was one of those vindictive persons, she could have easily, made a statement or said words to the parliament, which would have, encouraged them, if you will, to move into these countries, to fight and have these countries to remain parts of the United Kingdom. However, that's not what happened. She oversaw the annexation again of these countries in their own. In modern politics and history, a parliament is a legislative body of government. Generally, a modern parliament has fractions representing the electorate, making laws and overseeing the government via hearings and inquiries. Sounds very common to our Congress. The parliament really it came about, I want to say, and I'm trying to remember the years as I also look at the research here on my side. It wasn't original to England. It came about years and years later because some people saw fit to have a more modern government rather than having a king or queen to dictate what had taken place. However, they liked the ceremonial role of the queen and the king. Brothers and sisters, as we examine the life of Queen Elizabeth, we have to look at what took place under 70 years. I started talking about how she, now I don't want to use the word reluctantly, but was forced into the role by the abdication of her uncle. And now, at the age of 21, when she was just a princess and her father was king, she said, and I quote, and I'm paraphrasing, I will devote my life to the service of this country, be my years long or short. She will do that. And whether you liked her as a queen or as a ceremonial person, or if you had an issue with her just because you don't understand or know what it means to reign as a king or queen of a nation, understand that this lady was only doing the role that had been presented to her. And for 70 years, without question, she did this. Now, some people will say, well, what kind of work did she have to do? There was a box delivered every single morning to the monarch, well, to Queen Elizabeth. And in that box was a lot of correspondence, was a lot of letters from Parliament, was a lot of information or letters that she needed to write or respond to, a lot of information from leaders around the world seeking her comments and her commentary on certain things. And so every single day, she went to work with this box. It was delivered every morning. And throughout the day, she would have to work on these different issues that was brought before her. Not only did she do that once a week, that she would meet with the prime minister. Now, the meeting with the prime minister was for the prime minister to inform the queen of the things that were taking place in the realms and of areas that wanted to de-annex itself from the United Kingdom. Now, in this time frame, brothers and sisters, she has had many opportunities to say to the prime minister and to so many other members of the parliament that she did not approve of it. And because they reverenced and gave a lot of love and support to her royal majesty, they probably would have listened. But because they also gave reverence to the fact that she often would go into these places on what they would call a Commonwealth tour. They would go into these areas and they would see the needs and or the issues in these areas, and they would address them from their point of view. One of the things that's not televised or not always discussed is where some of these nations had saw fit for themselves the ability to maintain of themselves. But what's also not mentioned is that a lot of these nations still accept, and I don't want to use the word reparations, but they still accept a lot of funds from the United Kingdom in its ability to move forward as a country. So not all of the countries, not only did they take their independence, but some of them still took support from the United Kingdom and from what the parliament was offering. If you notice, when you look at some of the countries and all of their governmental offices, many of them still have a parliament. There are a lot of African nations that at once belonged to the United Kingdom now have their own government, and they use the same type of government, And because of this, they've just gotten used to this and they run with it. It's not uncommon for countries to use some of the examples that had been given to them previously. Again, the United States is still using some of the things that were taking place when we were a part of the 13 colonies. And now, brothers and sisters, we find that the Queen is dead. Long her reign of 70 years, had she been able to oversee so many different things, in the 7 or 8 presidents that we've experienced here in the United States, not only has she sent correspondence, but sometimes was in communication with the wives of the former first ladies as they were dealing with the deaths of their husbands, and they just had to deal with a lot of things in that manner. Excuse me for just a moment. But brothers and sisters, I want you to understand that, again, her role was ceremonial. It was not that this lady was reigning or ruling over anyone in particular, causing them to be a certain way or do a certain thing. She simply was what the country for which she lived and served was serving in this position as the queen. Queen Elizabeth was born in April, which is the best month of the year, I should have you all to know. She just missed the mark of being in Aries, as she was born April 21st of 1926. So can you imagine what life must have been like for someone who was born into a royal family and who the 4 of them, it was her father, her mother, and her sister, who were just enjoying the life of being royals, but not in the limelight of being king and queen. And then they move into this realm all of a sudden, and her father, who was stressed by this role every single day of his life, unfortunately died at a younger age, but because of his health issues, he had lung cancer. And then she became the head of the Commonwealth. So I want to give a list of countries that are currently in the Commonwealth and the countries that have left the Commonwealth, because that's what I want you to know about the countries that are in and the countries that are out. So currently, Canada is still a part of the Commonwealth. Canada became a part of the Commonwealth in 1952 when she became queen. So it wasn't that she created or made them a part of it. They became a part of it on their own recognizance. Australia, again, in 1952, and is still serving as a part of the Commonwealth today. South Africa was a part of the Commonwealth from 1952 until 1961 when it gained its independence. Pakistan from 1952 until 1956 when it gained its independence. Sierra Leone from 1952 to 1972. Now, let me pause. Let me make a note here. Many of these countries changed or redacted or decided that they wanted to be independent, not so much because they didn't want to be ruled anymore by the United Kingdom, but more so because a lot of them did not accept a woman being in charge of them. This is very little information that is seized because some of these countries are very male-led and they didn't see fit for a woman to be in charge of their realms anymore. Ghana was a part of it from 1957 until 1960. Again, Sierra Leone. Jamaica was from 1962 up until this recent year. Trinidad and Tobago from 1962 and 1976. Kenya from 1963 to 1964. Gambia from 1965 to 1970, Papua New Guinea from 1975 until current, St. Lucia from 1979 until now, St. Kitts and Nevis from 1983 until now. All of these individuals, and there's so much more to go over, but all of them are part of the Commonwealth. Understanding that her role, and I say this over and over and over again, her role is ceremonial. Now, one of the things that she is able to do, although the prime minister is an elected official, when one dies or in the midst of his or her service, she has the ability, or the monarch has the ability, to appoint a prime minister. Now, again, the prime minister is someone that is elected to this position, but in general, if one should die or if there is one to leave the position, the monarch has the ability to change or to bring one to that area. Now, here's some more history on the Queen herself. Queen Elizabeth, where a lot of people were joking back and forth about the fact that she married her cousin. In fact, they were cousins. However, they were cousins through, and there's really no however, Queen Victoria, which was her great, great, great grandmother. Uh, they both shared that in common, that they both shared the same great, great, great grandmother of Queen Victoria. George VI, again, was her father, and because of his health declining, he was not able to make the Commonwealth tour that they would do on a regular basis. And so Queen Elizabeth and her husband, Prince Charles, or excuse me, Prince Philip, was sent out into this Commonwealth tour. And it was while on tour, somewhere in Africa, and I can't remember exactly where they were, but the king died. And she was immediately known as the Queen. While Elizabeth's accession to the throne was, not understood or not anticipated at that moment, Winston Churchill, one of the most noted prime ministers of Great Britain, even of himself, was not particularly ecstatic about a woman now being in charge, although he knew at some point she would come to reign. At this moment, he didn't see fit for her to do so. So he held off her coronation for an entire year. So, and as a matter of fact, it was a year and a few months. It was about an 18-month time frame before she actually had her coronation as queen, because Winston Churchill was of the belief that a woman was not privy to lead that country in the realm. However, during the time of her reign and during the time of his life, they served very well together and got to know each other extremely well. The Queen, ladies and gentlemen, again, took the throne in 1952. The absence of her father caused her to now be in charge. So what is it that a monarch does? What does colonization do? Colonization is, again, going into other countries, making them a part of your country. Now, whether we want to admit it or not, America has done that in and of itself. And we have gone, and we do that quite often when we go to war with a lot of these places. Not in that we create it and make it a part of the United States, but everywhere that we have gone and had a war, the United States still has a embassy or has land or territory there. That's how, when you communicate sometimes with men and women who have served in the military, and you'll find that their sons or daughters were born, in other countries, they have citizenship in the United States because they were born on what would be considered American soil, because the military post is of American soil. So that's not America taking place of the country or taking over the country, but is America in some instances having some colonization rights in some of those areas. As we journey back to this, as soon as the Portuguese had conquered and populated some areas, Spain decided to do the exact same thing. And so that's where we hear that great explorer, Christopher Columbus, who in 1492 began looking for a Western route in India and China. The funny thing about that is that he was confused as to where he was going and landed in America. Instead, he landed in the Bahamas, kicking off the Spanish Empire. Spain and Portugal began locked in a competition, brothers and sisters, for new territories and took over indigenous people and lands in America, India, Africa, and Asia. That's how colonization began. It was not of the British rule, but of Spain and Portugal. England, the Netherlands, France, and Germany quickly began to do the same thing, because when they realized that you can go into other areas and take over, they said, why not we do the same thing and take over? Because at this time in our world history, countries were trying to have dominance over everything because they wanted to be the world power. We talk about that in Vladimir Putin. We talk about that even in America, America being a world power. Most countries back in this time wanted to be a world power in the 15th century. And so they began their own empire, building overseas, fighting Spain and Portugal for the right to lands that they had already conquered. So England, the Netherlands, France, and Germany not only had already had some land, but they decided to fight Portugal as well as fight Spain to the rights of land that they had already conquered. Despite the growth of European colonies in the New World, most countries managed to gain independence during the 1800s or the 18th and the 19th century, beginning with American Revolution in 1776 and the Haitian Revolution in 1781. However, the Eastern Hemisphere continued to tempt European colonial powers. And so whereas some areas were fighting for it, some areas decided, you know what, it's just not worth the fight. And so I make that statement so it is understood that everybody was not fighting for independence. Some were just happy being a part of the rule. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want to re-emphasize that Queen Elizabeth did not create, nor did she tell Parliament and anybody else to stay colonized areas. Colonial powers justified their conquest by asserting that they had a legal and religious obligation to take over the land and the culture of the indigenous people. And in doing so, so many of them held on to all of these people, conquering nations, casting their role as civilizing barbaric and savage nations. So yes, colonization is bad. But when it was taking most of its place was when world power was at its height. And everybody and their mother wanted to be in charge of this nation, be in charge of that nation, and overtake this and overtake that, and take everything of its own. Despite the power of colonizers who claimed lands that they were already owned and populated by indigenous people, resisting in its integral part of the story of colonism, even before decolonization, indigenous people of all continents staged violent and nonviolent resistance to their conquerors. Because like here in America, whereas we talk about Spain coming in and taking over, we talk about Europe, but we have to remember that even America, when we had established ourselves, we went into other areas and took away the indigenous people, the Indian, Native Americans, and made them move out of their area. So I guess where this came from me, this conversation was because everybody was hawking or focused on the fact that the United Kingdom had done it, but very few are familiar, or I won't say familiar, very few ignore the fact that our America, the place that we love, land of the free, home of the brave, did it in and of itself and colonized the entire United States. Now, you're not going to get me to talk bad about America because I love this place. I serve this country abroad in Afghanistan. However, I needed to be known that Britain was not the only place that had ever done so. Colonial governments, brothers and sisters, invested in infrastructure, trade, and disassembled, medical and technology, or advanced medical and technological advances in the area. In some cases, they encourage literacy. So whereas, yes, they went into these countries and they overtook it for the sake of their own territories, some of the areas they brought it to life. They gave more to it than what was there before. So some would argue that, oh, they went in and they disenfranchised people, and that can be an argument. But in some areas, they went in and enhanced the areas and the environment and gave more to the people that were there. And some folk would say, "Oh, Joe, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just looking at this as being a part of the go along with the get along." When we examine some of the areas and some of the countries that were, originally colonized, some of them had nothing at all. Now, I don't approve of the wars and the overtaking of them, but since some of the colonization took place, some of these areas have been enhanced and improved and have far more infrastructure than they ever would have in their life. The adoption of the Western human rights standards and sowed seeds of democratic institutions and systems of government. Some of these countries that were once colonized and are now independent have an entire government that they're able to function in now because of what took place in colonization. Oh, Joe, you're just talking a bunch of mess. Well, it is true. A lot of these countries now have real infrastructure, real government because of this. However, there has been coercion and forced assimilation. I will say that. Some areas of people had to be forced into assimilation, but we do that every day in our lives. When you start a new job, one of the companies that I worked for, everybody knows that I worked for a number of years for Home Depot, whom I loved and had great respect for the country and for the company. However, Home Depot has a statement of bleeding orange. And so not only do you become a part of Home Depot, but you got to bleed orange. That was assimilation. The same thing with the military. When you join the United States Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and apparently the Space Force and the Coast Guard, there is an assimilation period. Most people say that they can't be a part of the military because of basic training. Oh, nobody can holler at me. Nobody can tell me what to do. Nobody can do this, that, and the other. Well, if you work any job, you are being told what to do at some point or another. And even if you're a business owner, your customers not so much tell you what to do, but they influence your ability to do the business that you do. And so colonism, brothers and sisters, impacts include environmental, advances, but it has also had some negative advances as far as ethnic rivalries and as far as human right violations. However, we now live in a time and a period in life that everything that we speak of, good, bad, or indifferent, all it takes is for a movement to change that. And so that was the whole purpose of me wanting to discuss this today. Whereas when I was reading all of the comments and all of the negative statements that were being made concerning the reign of Queen Elizabeth, I thought to myself, it would be important that we educate people on the knowledge of colonization, as well as on the countries that have found their independence since, and the countries for which Queen Elizabeth oversaw the independence of them from the United Kingdom. I gave you a list of them earlier, and the list, of course, goes on. So now they have something called the Commonwealth. And brothers and sisters, the Commonwealth would be something along the lines of what we have in the United Nations. Now, the United Nations is there to discuss, a variety of things that affect our world. However, the Commonwealth has decided to pull together to provide resources to all of the areas for which are technically ruled or under the British monarchy. And if in fact they decided that they didn't want to be a part of the Commonwealth, they could easily pull out. Nobody is making them be a part of it. So I'm not sure that everybody is in agreement with this, or do I believe that everyone acknowledges this? But guess what? We now have a new monarch, or not we, but Europe, the United Kingdom now has a new monarch, and that of King Charles III. Now, the question is, will more come into the Commonwealth now that there's a male back in charge, or will more flee from it because they are not quite sure on what type of king he will be? We don't know. As a matter of fact, this man has he has more OJT than anybody in the world. No king, with the exception of Queen Victoria's son, for Queen Victoria was the second longest serving monarch, as she served 63 years. And her son, and his name escapes me at the moment, but he served for about 9 years after the death of his mother. But he had his mother's 63 years of OJT, but Prince Charles, now King Charles III, had 70 years to watch his mother do her job. Now, I also saw and read a lot of comments about how Queen Elizabeth dealt with the death of Diana. And, you know, there are so many false statements and things that are being put out there. But I want you to imagine what it would be like if you are a grandmother and suddenly the daughter of your grandchildren passes away or dies. Generally, most families with hearts would want to somewhat shield their children from all of the information and all of the things that are being said and brought to their attention during the death of their mother. And ladies and gentlemen, whether you agree with this or not, it is fact that Queen Elizabeth was not being a nasty woman concerning Diana. In truth, the problem was with her son at that time, Prince Charles, who was having, oddly enough, an affair with who now is his current wife. And so the problem was with Prince Charles. However, Princess Diana went on to live a very wonderful life when she separated from Prince Charles. And it was just different watching someone who no longer was a part of the royal family live a life that was pleasing and people loved. However, upon her death, Prince Arthur, that's correct. Upon her death, she shielded her grandchildren because, as you can imagine, it must have been an awful thought to know that your mother and her boyfriend or fiance were being chased by paparazzi, and they end up being in a car wreck because of this. Now, there were so many speculations to say that, you know, that the queen was responsible for this, or somebody had them killed or something like that. That's not true. If in fact they wanted that to be done, they could have done that the moment that she announced that she wanted to be divorced, or they had announced that they wanted to be divorced. But she went on to live a very prosperous and wonderful life of her own without Prince Charles. And she took very good care of her sons. And basically, brothers and sisters, what Queen Elizabeth was doing was shielding her grandchildren from the news media and everything that was going to take place in the days, weeks ahead upon the death of their mother. Now, everybody was upset that she didn't come out and speak. Most people were expecting her to say something. The truth of the matter is, when someone dies, it's not always easy for you to have something to say. You didn't know what to say. And I'm sure the queen, even in her own thought, questioned what should she say, because she had not even addressed this issue with her grandsons yet to let them know what had taken place. Let me take a pause to acknowledge that after Queen Victoria, Edward succeeded her. Arthur was Victoria's first son, but it was Edward who succeeded her in that throne. And so he only served for about 9 or 10 years after his mother. And so there was a running joke that even maybe now King Charles may not have that many years of service because his mother took all those years from her. But I want to also bring this to acknowledgement. We all, brothers and sisters, if you notice anything about Queen Elizabeth, in every comment, every Christmas speech, she always acknowledged God and Jesus the Christ. And I make this point to say this. None of us know the relationship that she had with her creator, but she knew that she was created from the love and the support and the admiration of her parents, but also from the one true and living king. And I know this is a political show, but I have to make this known because everybody who was making all of these negative statements about, I'm glad this woman is dead, this woman prayed to the same Christ that many of us pray to every day. And she believed in the same one that we bow our heads and say the Lord's Prayer to. And so for those of you who made these critical thoughts and statements about this woman's death, shame on you. And not from a stance of colonization, not from a stance of a government, but a shame on you from being a child of God. Because if in fact us, the Christian faith, really believes in what we say we believe, there's no need for us to be excited about anybody's death, because no one will be excited about your death when you die, because even you have done some things that people are not excited about, and some folks would love to run and tell their story. So show me a monarch, show me a leader who in his or her time as a leader who does not have blood on his or her hand. Even in our Bible, brothers and sisters, and this is the preacher coming out of me, please forgive me, but many of the people that we praise and lift up in the Bible had blood on their hands, but God was still able to use them for the time in which he needed a purpose to be done for them. So all of us, whether you agree with me or not, all of us have a purpose under the sun and under the heavens. And during the time of her reign, Queen Elizabeth brought about a different type of leadership. She brought about a different type of love and admiration. As a matter of fact, if you look and listen to any of the speeches of previous kings, or if you take any account for any of the previous rulers, you don't hear them talk about their relationship with their creator more than Queen Elizabeth did. You don't hear them discuss how important it is for them to gather with family and love on their family and to be around them during the holidays and just in general. Not only was this woman the Queen of England, but she was a wife. She was a mother and a grandmother and loved her grandchildren dearly. Again, her job was ceremonial. Most of everything that she did on a day-to-day basis was in conjunction with what Parliament or the Crown Parliament had asked of her to do. Her trips around the globe, around the world, were to promote friendship, were to promote love and dignity, was to promote a commonwealth for all of the world. And we would be so blessed to have been in the presence of such a refined woman. And I'm just going to tell you, to be honest with you, some of you all could learn to be just a little more refined like her, because the age in which we live now, nobody has couth, nobody has refinement, and everybody's just saying and speaking whatever they want to say. And whereas she taught, if you will, us how to refrain from remarking on things of negative when people wanted to say. And even in 1992, when all of these divorces of her children and the burning down or some burning of the castle and so many different things that had taken place in her life, she admitted that 1992 was one of the hardest years of her life, but she still admitted that her Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, brought her along the way. Listen, I'm going to get off that, but I just wanted to take this moment to honor Queen Elizabeth and her 70-year reign, as today she was laid to rest by her beloved husband of 72 years, I believe in and of itself, Prince Philip, who they stayed true to each other. So if there are lessons to be learned, there are lessons of how to maintain a marriage, even in a leadership role, how to maintain and raise children and grandchildren, even in a leadership role. And so that's my focus, that's my love, that's my, if you will, my contribution to the Queen as she was laid to rest today in London. So I want to real quickly bring you up to date on what is happening here in our great state of Georgia as we get ready to close out this show. There is a midterm election, or we are coming into election season here in Georgia. We are, let's see, are 50 days away, to be exact. I think we're about 50 days away from Georgia's election. And ladies and gentlemen, you have a choice of electing Stacey Abrams to be the next governor of Georgia, or you have a choice of re-electing Brian Kemp to continue to be the governor of Georgia. Not only are those two, but the other critical race that we have is that of Raphael Warnock and that of Herschel Walker. Now, I am never going to tell you who to vote for because I am an independent of myself. And I personally believe that both of our parties here in the United States have a bigger issue than that of just being parties. But I will tell you this: pay attention to those who speak for you and those who don't speak up for you. Pay attention to those who actually have a plan and have no plan. Pay attention to individuals who are running specifically on their party and not on their principle. I need you to understand that we are coming into a time in our world and in our nation that people are turning away from reason and turning into a party. And the parties, brothers and sisters, of my own thought, are the worst thing that we have. I really wish, to be honest with you, that the parties would implode and we create something different, because it is time for something different. Because both parties in our nation are footing the bill for themselves and not always for us. However, when you examine them, there's always one that gives you something more than the others. Voter registration ends in 29 days before the election. You need to be registered to vote, because otherwise you will not be able to vote November 8th. You need to be registered to vote here in the state of Georgia and all throughout the nation, because there are races taking place not only in Georgia, but there are more governors up for re-election or more governor races throughout the United States, more Senate races throughout the United States that are taking place, more congressional races that are taking place throughout the United States, and you need to pay attention to that. I want to close on this like I started. I noticed that there was a lot of commentary about the British rule and about colonization. But I also noticed that the same ones that were making comments about this and reposting things about her, being a colonizer, many of them have very little understanding of our own government. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do nothing else, I encourage you to take the time to read and understand what your government does for you. And stop saying to yourself that your vote doesn't count. Every single vote counts. And bad people are elected every year by good people who don't vote. Everything that happens in your area, everything that happens in your community is specifically based upon the people that you elect. It is important, ladies and gentlemen, that we get out and exercise our right to vote. It is important that not only that you vote, but you go back and read the referendums and the resolutions that are being brought forward to your community. Because if you ever wonder why you're lacking something in your community, it may be one, that you didn't vote, and two, that you misunderstood what you were voting for. And so it's very important that you are doing everything that you need to do to exercise your right to vote. I was reading some of the comments. It says, did you read or hear about men and voting? I can't say that I'm sure about it. I must have missed it somewhere along the way, but I will make sure that I educate you all on this on a later date as we're coming to the end of our hour. But I want to emphasize the importance of voting. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, Britain has a king or queen, not because they vote for one, but because they've just decided to keep that because they like the adage. But they do vote for the House of Lords and the House of Commons ever so often. They vote for a prime minister ever so often. We know democracy because of Britain and France. We know that because of these areas. And it is extremely important that when election time comes around, that you do not ignore it because you don't think that your voice is not being heard. I tell this story as often as I can because it was always disturbing to me. It was midterm election, I want to say in 2010, and I was door knocking in Michigan, working up there. And I knocked on the door of a young man. This is 2010 now, midterm. It was not time for a new president, but it was midterm. And I knocked on the door and I asked him, was he registered to vote and was he getting ready to vote in the election? And he said, no problem, dude, no problem. I'm voting for Obama. Notice I said this was midterm election. He was voting for Obama when Obama was not currently running for president. As a matter of fact, President Obama had now been in office 2 years, and he was not up for re-election for another 2 years. Again, bad people are elected every year by good people who don't vote. If you do not exercise your right to vote, I never want to hear you complain. If you do not exercise your right to vote, you have no reason to complain. If you do not exercise your right to vote, I never want to hear you say anything about what you don't have, because you lack because you did not exercise your right. My Bible tells me that my people perish for lack of knowledge, and that we also perish because we ask not. And so if you don't get out there and encourage yourself to read about what's taking place in your area, you will perish. Because every time that we allow bad people to be elected, we go without. Every time we allow them to not be there, we go without. Apparently, we have to encourage each other, specifically that of African-American men. The voter turnout for us is always low, but we encourage you to get out and exercise your right to vote. And mainly because for whatever reason, we don't feel like we have the voice. But I assure you that our voices can be heard. When we stand up as men and show them who we are, then trust me, they will see who we are and they will acknowledge us from then on. I want to leave on this story. And I like to tell this story all the time about Condoleezza Rice. And I love Condoleezza Rice. I am not a Republican. I repeat, I am not a Republican, nor am I a registered Democrat. However, I am an independent and I do vote both parties. Yes, I do. But I need you to know this as we close. Condoleezza Rice, in her book about her life, she tells the story of her father who was on his way to vote in the Democratic primary. And when he got there to vote, the Democrats did not allow him to vote. They, in fact, imposed the poll tax. And because of that, he was not able to vote. On his way home, he was accosted by a man in a car who offered him a ride, and he asked him where was he going. And he said, I was trying to vote in the primary election, but was not given the opportunity to do so. And so the man said, follow me and I'll take you to vote. And he got the chance to vote in the Republican primary election. Now, I'm not saying that to tell you that you should be a Democrat or a Republican, but what I'm telling you is that if you understand some of the people's stories of how they became who they are, you'll understand that our parties are the reason why some people are the way they are. Good people are elected or miss the opportunity to serve because bad people are elected every year by good people who don't vote. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been The People's Choice, and I'm your host, Joe Flint, all one word, like a tribe called Quest. We appreciate you for joining us here on WCEG. Remember to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and every other place that you can do so. On that note, I'm out. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good evening. Good night.